When Jack Morrison finally retired after 25 years as a Navy SEAL, he carried with him both the scars and the discipline of service. He wanted nothing more than to leave behind the chaos of foreign battlefields and slip into a life of calm routine with his wife, Sarah, who had been his anchor during every deployment. She had nursed him through nights of restlessness, helped him navigate the storms of PTSD, and kept their marriage whole through circumstances that would have shattered many others. For them, Pine Creek Estates had seemed like a sanctuary, a postcard of manicured lawns and quiet lakeside streets, where the greatest concern appeared to be which flowers to plant along the driveway. Sarah fell in love with the spacious backyard almost immediately. She envisioned a garden filled with medicinal herbs she could use in the teas and remedies she shared with hospital patients. Jack's heart, weary of constant readiness, softened at the idea of afternoon fishing on the lake and quiet hours in a garage big enough for his woodworking tools. They moved in with the hopeful expectation that this would be the forever home they had long imagined during his deployments, a safe place to heal and to grow older together. For the first 6 months, the idyllic dream seemed to be coming true. Jack began offering free self-defense classes to neighborhood children, eager to put his training to good use in a constructive way. Sarah continued rising early for shifts at the hospital, pouring her energy into caring for others with the same gentleness that made her the emotional center of their household. They invited neighbors Mike and Rebecca Johnson over for summer barbecues on their newly built deck, laughter echoing across the fences, the air scented with charcoal and fresh herbs from Sarah's garden. Slowly, Jack felt the tight grip of hypervigilance ease. The twitch of needing to scan for danger every time a door creaked began to fade. For the first time in years, peace felt possible. That calm took physical form when Jack began a secret project for their 25th wedding anniversary. Using the tools he had always carried like extensions of himself, saws, chisels, even the muscle memory of symmetrical cuts he'd once used for combat shelters, he crafted a garden trellis. Sturdy enough to endure storms, delicate enough to showcase roses, it was his way of giving form to everything they had endured together. When he unveiled it, Sarah's joy was overwhelming. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood and told him with glowing eyes, "This is what I dreamed of." It stood by their home, a quiet symbol of renewal after a life spent under fire. But peace, Jack would soon learn, was something their new neighborhood tolerated only on its own warped terms. 3 days after Sarah planted her roses, the first knock came at their front door. Jack opened it to find a man built like a gym advertisement, thick shoulders beneath a polo shirt stretched to capacity, clipboard in hand, and a smirk that oozed authority. He introduced himself curtly, Chad Wilson, compliance officer for the Pine Creek Homeowners Association. He barely spared Jack courtesy before rattling off accusations. Their trellis violated Regulation 27B, Section 4, no external modifications without prior approval. "This is a $500 fine," he barked, "and the structure must be removed within 48 hours. Jack listened with the calm exterior honed by decades of training. But inside, calculations shifted. This was not how communities usually functioned. He tried reason. He suggested retroactive approval paperwork. Chad sneered and dismissed the idea. "The rules are the rules. Remove it or the fine doubles." A slip of paper was shoved into Jack's hand before the enforcer strutted back to his HOA-branded SUV, a vehicle that looked more like a tactical unit than something meant to serve quiet residents. Jack closed the door slowly, internal alarms beginning to stir. Sarah read the violation notice with disbelief, her face tight with frustration. Later that evening, their neighbor Mike leaned across the fence while Jack studied the HOA bylaws. Mike, a retired cop, warned them grimly. They weren't the first victims. "Karen Matthews runs this place like her personal kingdom," he explained. "They forced 3 families out already this year. They don't just enforce rules, they weaponize them." That word, weaponize, lodged itself in Jack's mind like incoming intelligence. An HOA normally strived for harmony and stability, since frequent homeowner turnover disrupted property value. Why would Pine Creek choose the opposite approach? Jack's operator instincts ticked immediately toward hidden motives. Something beneath the surface didn't add up. When Jack filed a polite appeal hoping to mend fences, the answer came back harsh and swift. Denied. Not only that, but suddenly, he and Sarah were cited for 5 new violations. The mailbox wasn't the correct shade of black despite being unchanged since move-in. The lawn grass exceeded maximum height by half an inch. The garbage cans, though behind a fence, were deemed visible. Sarah's herb garden was unauthorized, and Jack's free self-defense classes were dubbed a public nuisance. Overnight, their $500 fine ballooned to over $2,000. Random? No. Targeted. A pattern as clear as any recon mission Jack had ever analyzed. He showed Sarah the papers. Her hands trembled with anger, not fear. "This isn't right," she whispered. "Not just for us, for everyone else they're bullying." Jack nodded, feeling that deadly, familiar calm that used to precede missions seep through his veins. He had tried to retire. He had tried to put the soldier away, but these people had chosen to make her a target, and in so doing, they had awakened the one man they should never have underestimated. The escalation came faster than Jack expected. After the barrage of violation notices, he tried taking the professional route. Formal appeals, calm emails, and even a request to meet directly with the HOA board. He thought, perhaps naively, that showing logic and fairness would disarm the situation, but he quickly realized that logic was irrelevant in Pine Creek. Fear and intimidation were the true governing tools. It began with Chad's patrols circling their home like predator drones. He'd park his HOA-branded SUV outside the Morrisons' house, pretending to check paperwork while sneaking photos of their windows. Jack confronted him once, asking directly what he was doing. Chad smirked, resting his hand casually on a low-slung taser clipped to his belt. "Just doing my job," he replied. "If you don't like being monitored, maybe this neighborhood isn't for you." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a threat. For Sarah, the harassment struck deeper. She had worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, only to come home and face notices taped to their door. Fine for mailbox color, fine for grass too long, fine for her carefully planted herb garden, plants she grew to make teas for patients fighting anxiety and chronic pain. For Sarah, her little patch of earth was a place of healing, her therapy after losing emergency ward patients at night. Now strangers in polo shirts were telling her it was an unauthorized structure. One evening she broke down while cooking, the papers stacked on the counter beside her. "We just wanted a life here, Jack. I thought it was finally over for us, the deployments, the loneliness, the fear of bad news at the door. And now this?" Jack took her hands, steady as always. "If they want to fight," he said quietly, "they're choosing the wrong opponent." That fight arrived sooner than either of them imagined. On a brisk evening after one of Sarah's most grueling shifts at the hospital, she decided to dismantle part of the trellis herself. She didn't want the wooden structure to be the cause of so much grief. Jack was in the garage when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of raised voices and then Sarah's anguished cry of pain. He sprinted to the front steps in seconds, instincts kicking into high gear as if he were back in a combat zone. There she was, collapsed on the porch, clutching her shoulder, her face twisted in agony. Sarah, the strongest woman he knew, couldn't even sit upright. Standing over her were Chad and two other HOA enforcers, one of them holding a camera mid-recording like they were capturing evidence for sport. Sarah's voice trembled as she gasped. Dislocated shoulder, maybe rotator cuff. Even through agony, her nurse's mind was diagnosing herself. Chad's explanation came sharp and defensive. She had refused to allow a compliance inspection. According to him, Section 12 of the HOA agreement gave them full authority to enter properties. Jack's vision narrowed, his mind instantly mapping the field. 3 men. Primary aggressor front and center. No body armor, no military discipline. In his Navy SEAL days, he could have ended the situation in seconds. Neutralized Chad with a crushed trachea, incapacitated the others, controlled the perimeter. His muscle memory screamed at him to strike. But Jack Morrison wasn't in uniform anymore. This wasn't Afghanistan. This was his home, his wife, and the fight required precision of a different kind. Not a broken jaw, but a broken system. He knelt beside Sarah, lifting her gently, calibrating every move to ease her pain. His voice was low and lethal. "You've just made a serious mistake." Mike and Rebecca Johnson, their neighbors, rushed over at the commotion. Rebecca, quick on her feet, had already pulled out her phone, recording the entire scene. Jack told Mike, "Call the police." Chad smirked one more time. "Go ahead. Officer Benson's a friend of ours. This'll be written off as a neighbor's accident." The audacity nearly made Jack laugh. Not only had they injured his wife, they were confident the system would cover for them. 20 minutes later, Benson confirmed that fear. Arriving casually, he listened without interest to Sarah's account, dismissed her injury as likely a trip, and suggested everyone work it out like adults. He refused to file a report, his smirk nearly a mirror of Chad's just moments earlier. Driving Sarah to the hospital later, Jack's hands gripped the wheel with a calm intensity. Her arm was strapped in a temporary sling to keep the shoulder joint from worsening. The pain in her face gutted him, yet alongside it he saw something else, her grit. Fighting tears, Sarah whispered, "Jack, they can't keep doing this. For all of us, we have to stand up." He kissed her forehead gently as the hospital lights approached. "We will," he promised, "but not the way they think." That night when they returned home, Jack didn't storm around in anger or talk about confronting Chad physically. Instead, he stood silently in his office, staring at blank sheets of paper and the corkboard mounted on the wall. Slowly, methodically, he began arranging documents, the denial letters, violation notices, appeal copies. He tacked them up in ordered rows like intelligence briefings from his past career. A pad of paper soon filled with names: Karen Matthews, Doug Peterson, Chad, Officer Benson. Around each name, he drew connecting lines, leaving space for intel to be filled in. In the Navy SEALs, he had learned that the strongest opponent isn't always the one you fight with bullets. It's the one who knows your vulnerabilities and exploits them. Pine Creek's HOA had just shown theirs: arrogance, corruption, and a reliance on fear to silence their victims. Jack now had his mission. The operation wouldn't be fought with sheer strength, but with patience, strategy, and documentation. They saw him as a middle-aged man toying with a trellis and a wife they could shove around. What they didn't understand was that beneath the calm exterior stood a tactician, trained to dismantle enemy networks piece by piece. And so, as Sarah slept in the next room with her shoulder immobilized, Jack Morrison sat in the glow of a desk lamp, quietly launching a new operation. His target was no longer terrorists abroad. It was tyrants at home masquerading as a neighborhood association. What they had awakened in him was not rage, but something more dangerous: cold intent and absolute patience. The assault on Sarah hadn't broken him. It had unlocked him. The morning after Sarah's injury, Jack sat in their dining room with an empty cup of coffee and a whiteboard propped against the wall. The space no longer looked like a cozy family room. It resembled a command center. Papers blanketed the table: HOA bylaws, denial letters, suspicious fee notices, every scrap of evidence he and Sarah had collected over the past weeks. One corner of the room displayed the corkboard arrangement he'd begun the previous night. Names connected with red lines like a battlefield map: Karen Matthews, Doug Peterson, Chad Wilson, Officer Benson. Around each name he had left room for notes, intel, and weaknesses. This wasn't petty homeowner discontent anymore. This was an operation, and Jack Morrison had just shifted into operator mode. His first move wasn't confrontation, but intelligence gathering. Years in the SEAL teams had taught him a truth: never step onto an active field blind. You don't just attack, you scout, observe, and dismantle the enemy systemically. With Sarah resting her arm in a sling, Jack paid a visit to Mike Johnson, the retired detective next door. Mike's eyes darkened when Jack explained in detail what Chad had done the night before. Then he disappeared into his home office and returned with a thick, dust-heavy folder. Inside were years of quietly collected complaints, financial notes, and suspicious HOA activity. Mike had tried filing reports, but with Benson shielding the board, nothing ever stuck. "Karen runs this HOA like a cartel," Mike muttered. "I knew something was rotten, but never had the leverage to expose it." For Jack, this folder wasn't just paper. It was a starter intel package, something any mission depended upon. Digging into the folder, one fact blazed like a signal flare. Karen's personal wealth had ballooned after her husband's sudden death 3 years earlier, when he supposedly succumbed to accidental carbon monoxide poisoning in his garage. Officer Benson, of course, had been the responding officer, and the case had been conveniently closed without deeper forensic review. Within months, Karen was sporting diamond jewelry, luxury vehicles, and an endless parade of cosmetic upgrades, all while her fixed retirement income miraculously turned into prosperity. Doug Peterson, meanwhile, was a disgraced banker with a history of accounting irregularities swept under the rug. And Chad? His sealed record screamed domestic violence, charges that vanished coincidentally around the time he began working as Pine Creek's muscle. To Jack's mind, this wasn't oversight. It was an ecosystem of corruption. The network widened further when Rebecca Johnson, Mike's wife and a local journalist, joined the operation. She flipped open her laptop and revealed years of suppressed notes. "I've wanted to write this story forever," she confessed. "But without named sources or airtight evidence, it would crumble in court. Now, with Jack's documentation and Sarah's injury, she finally had witnesses willing to speak out. And with Mike's folder connected to Jack's tactical sense, the weak points of the HOA's armor began lighting up. Back at home, Jack expanded his ops center. The corkboard filled with printouts. Arrows linked crime to motive. Benson's golf club membership comped by Karen. Suspicious HOA payments flowing to fake companies registered under Doug's relatives' names. Hidden graft disguised as landscape consulting, security advisement, even $25,000 administrative fees, logged without itemization. It was operational camouflage, deceptively mundane to anyone not trained in spotting patterns, but to Jack, it screamed laundering and misappropriation. The first counterattack came not with fists, but with statute. Jack phoned an unlikely ally, Sam Wilson, a young lawyer who'd once served in the Army Rangers. Years before, Sarah had fought to save Sam's life in the ER after a devastating motorcycle crash. When Jack explained the situation, Sam refused payment and declared, "If they messed with you and Sarah, I'm in." Together, they combed through the state's HOA regulatory code, highlighting 6 clear statutes the Pine Creek Board had violated. From selective enforcement to refusal to disclose public financial records to residents. Sam's conclusion was damning. They count on fear and cost deterring people from challenging them, but they've never dealt with someone who has time, skill, and tactical patience. Jack smiled thinly. "Exactly the battlefield where I live." Their next phase was meticulous record building. Jack and Sarah began photographing every HOA violation conveniently ignored at board members' homes. He snapped shots of Karen's unapproved gazebo. He documented Doug's oversized shed. He kept logs of bylaw infractions. Their sprinklers watering past hours, their garbage bins visible, their fences repainted without review. Selective enforcement, when proven, was poison to HOAs under state law. Each photo became a bullet of evidence more devastating than any weapon Jack had carried in combat. By the end of the week, his file had grown so thick the Morrison dining room might have been confused for a prosecutor's office. Meanwhile, Jack turned to PSYOPs, community engagement. Infiltrating Pine Creek's own resident forums, he began posting state statutes, explaining resident rights, and quietly encouraging others to document their violations. Rebecca published anonymous snippets hinting at corruption, inflated landscaping costs, unpaid signatures, evidence of intimidation. At first, participation was meek, but like soldiers emboldened when a leader holds ground under fire, neighbors started speaking up. Elderly residents recalled being fined for ADA-approved wheelchair ramps. One family exposed discrimination when told their Hanukkah decorations violated HOA lighting ordinances, despite Christmas lights glowing from other homes. Each story validated Jack's suspicions. This wasn't random, it was systematic and targeted. At night, while Sarah coached him patiently on injury protocols for her shoulder, she watched him circle names on the whiteboard. She feared his focus because she recognized it, the mission mind that once dragged men through enemy fire. "Promise me you won't confront them physically," she asked, anxiety softening her eyes. Jack kissed her forehead, voice steady. "I won't give them what they want, a pretext to criminalize me. I'll take them apart piece by piece until they don't even realize they're bleeding out." The counterattack wasn't just defensive anymore, it was surgical. Every photo filed, every violation documented, every record request submitted became another pressure point. For Karen and her cronies, the game was intimidation. For Jack, the game was patience. What they didn't realize was that the retired SEAL across the street wasn't after revenge. He was after annihilation. And by the time they noticed, it would be too late. The signs of desperation from the HOA came like familiar echoes of enemies on a battlefield. They escalated when cornered. Each day, Jack found new notices plastered across his front door. Violation: grass too tall. Violation: improper trash placement. Violation: unauthorized vehicle. The absurdity was laughable. His truck, parked in the same spot for months, was suddenly a problem. Each paper was another attempt to overwhelm him with harassment, to make him break. But Jack no longer saw them as threats. He read them like intelligence reports, clear signals that his counterattack was working, that Pine Creek's self-appointed rulers were rattled. And rattled enemies make mistakes. The first major crack came with Doug Peterson. One late afternoon, as Jack tore the latest stack of fines from his door, Doug approached wearing forced calm, the predator pretending to be peacemaker. "Jack," Doug began. Slick smile plastered thinly across his face. "This doesn't need to get messy. Karen wanted me to explain. We're willing to waive all the fines if you'll just drop the state complaint. Maybe even consider selling your property. Pine Creek may not be the right culture fit for your family." His words, polished to sound like diplomacy, rang in Jack's ears like the hiss of incoming fire. Beneath the surface, it was pure extortion. Jack studied him with the same cold analysis he once gave to warlords bluffing over ceasefire agreements. Then he replied evenly, "That sounds remarkably like blackmail, Doug. I wonder how the state investigators will interpret your offer." Doug's face twitched, mask cracking. "You're making a mistake. You don't know who you're dealing with." Jack smiled thinly. "Actually, I think that's your problem. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The escalation Karen attempted next was riskier. According to Chad, yes, Chad, their loyal enforcer, Karen and Benson were planning to plant evidence in Jack's truck. Chad came with the warning unexpectedly, discomfort flashing across his eyes. "Look, I don't like you," he admitted flatly when he showed up at Jack's gate. "But this has gone too far. Benson's going to put drugs in your truck tonight. Tomorrow he gets an anonymous tip and shows up to bust you." Jack had learned long ago. Betrayal within enemy ranks is the beginning of collapse. When Sarah, ever compassionate even in her sling, reminded him that she'd treated Chad at the hospital after his accident, Jack understood the crack. It wasn't loyalty to Jack, it was respect for Sarah's humanity, something that had planted doubt in Chad's conscience. For Jack, the warning was enough. He wouldn't ignore it. He would weaponize it. With Mike's help and Sam's legal counsel, they rigged surveillance. Hidden night vision cameras slotted discreetly near the driveway, lenses aimed at the truck. Inside, the planted package was swapped for sugar sealed in a neat brick. And so at 2 a.m., the operation unfolded on camera. Officer Benson, not in uniform, crept across the Morrison driveway, flashlight slicing the dark. Jack, watching quietly from the shadows of his second-floor window, saw him slip the package beneath the driver's seat. Plant placed. Enemy compromised. Hours later, in full uniform, Benson returned like an actor repeating his lines. He rapped at Jack's door with practiced importance. "We've received a tip," he announced smugly. "May I search your vehicle?" Jack, stone calm, played his part. Confusion, slight outrage, then resigned acquiescence. "I have nothing to hide. Go ahead." Benson strutted to the truck, retrieved the package with triumphant flourish and unwrapped it like a magician revealing contraband. Except his smirk faltered when the white powder tumbled out. Not cocaine, not meth, but plain baking sugar. Behind him, concealed cameras blinked silently, capturing his freeze frame of humiliation. Jack spoke lightly, almost conversationally. "No mistake, officer. Just not the substance you planted at 217 this morning." Benson's face drained as Jack produced his ace. "I've got the footage of you putting that in my truck. Copies already sent to your chief, the DA, and my lawyer." The second officer who had accompanied Benson stiffened at the words. "What's he talking about, Ben?" Confusion curdled into suspicion. Benson stood paralyzed, holding his own crime in his hand like evidence of treason. Jack stepped closer, voice as steady as it had been in combat briefings. "In the SEALs," he said, "we learned to anticipate enemy action and prepare countermeasures. This is your failed ambush, and you just destroyed your own career." By afternoon, news of Benson's arrest tore through Pine Creek like a storm. The untouchable cop shielding the HOA had been caught red-handed, and the myth of their invincibility shattered with him. Karen and Doug panicked, calling emergency board meetings, trying to regroup in shadows. But Jack and Sam stayed 2 steps ahead, obtaining court orders demanding all HOA meetings remain publicly noticed and recorded. When Karen attempted to conduct one at her house, a process server interrupted mid-sentence, delivering the court order in front of neighbors and Rebecca's rolling camera. Karen's mask of control cracked. Doug tried to slip out the back, only to find Mike waiting there with phone in hand. "Going somewhere, Doug?" Mike asked casually. The walls of intimidation were crumbling. Jack held his most devastating weapon in reserve, the secret recording of Karen and Doug plotting during a closed-door meeting. On tape, their voices acknowledged using HOA funds for personal gain, conspiring to fabricate violations, even instructing Benson on how to frame the Morrison problem. When Sam finally played the recording for the district attorney's office, the reaction was immediate. This isn't just civil abuse. This is criminal conspiracy, embezzlement, extortion, abuse of power. Search warrants followed fast. Dawn raids turned Pine Creek into a spectacle of flashing lights and shocked neighbors. Investigators stormed Karen's ornate home, hauling files, boxes of receipts, and accounts of consulting companies that didn't exist. From Doug's residence, bags of financial ledgers revealed gambling debt smoothed over with community money. Even the HOA office, once a nerve center of intimidation, turned into a crime scene with binders carted out as evidence. Jack stood at his window as Karen was paraded to a patrol car in handcuffs. Her once flawless hair and smug superiority looked small against the click of cameras and the murmur of neighbors finally witnessing her downfall. Jack didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He folded his arms, the quiet satisfaction of a mission executed perfectly easing through him. Karen, Doug, Benson, they had built their empire on fear. Fear had kept the residents isolated, silent, and submissive. But fear, Jack knew better than anyone, can cut both ways. And once the illusion breaks, no fortress, no HOA kingdom built on stolen money and arrogance can survive the collapse. The sound of handcuffs clicking around Karen Matthews's wrists was not the end of a battle. It was the beginning of renewal. News traveled through Pine Creek estates like a wildfire. The queen bee of the HOA had been dragged from her kingdom. Doug Peterson had been snared alongside her, and Officer Benson, once their shield, was a disgraced criminal stripped of badge and pension. But in Jack Morrison's world, victory was never measured just by enemies destroyed. It was measured by what was saved. And what had been saved was not only Sarah's dignity, but an entire community that had lived under years of fear. The arrests were followed by weeks of public revelations. Rebecca's article exploded onto the front page of the local paper. HOA officials charged in embezzlement, extortion and conspiracy, funds stolen, residents harassed. The piece named names, detailed the offshore accounts, showed the photos, even included the tally. Over $250,000 siphoned away from Pine Creek residents. Other outlets picked up the story and leaned on its cinematic kernel. A decorated Navy SEAL, once trained to fight insurgents overseas, had systematically dismantled a corrupt neighborhood regime at home. The irony was too good for national reporters to ignore. Cameras appeared at the community gates interviewing relieved residents while commentators labeled Jack the HOA Terminator. Jack bristled at the dramatization, but Sarah would only smile and squeeze his hand. "Let them call it what they want," she said. "We know what you did here." The community didn't just gossip, they organized. Within weeks, more than 100 residents gathered at the clubhouse, more people than had ever attended an HOA function in memory. Jack stood at the front, his presence calm but commanding, as he laid out what had been stolen, how residents had been manipulated, and most importantly, what could be done differently. "They counted on our silence," he said, voice carrying through the tense room. "They thrived because we believed fighting back was impossible. But when people unite, when they stop hiding, no corrupt authority can hold." The applause that followed wasn't for him, he knew. It was for the release of years of suppressed frustration. That night, a temporary board was voted in, a homeowners' rights committee was established, and the words "never again" became a quiet mantra in Pine Creek. The transformation was astonishing. Association fees were cut by a third when audits eliminated the black hole consulting services Karen and Doug funded. With accountable budgeting, money actually flowed to repairs, landscaping, and community events. That ostentatious sign Karen had installed with stolen funds, reading "Pine Creek Estates, a premier community," was torn down and replaced with something simpler, more honest. Pine Creek, where neighbors become friends. The former HOA enforcement office, once a nerve center of fines and intimidation, was repurposed into a community resource hub with a small library, farmers market stalls on weekends, and parenting workshops. The irony wasn't lost on Jack that the very space once used to control had become a place to empower. Sarah, meanwhile, returned to work at the hospital with her usual grace. Her shoulder healed but never forgotten. Sometimes in the cold weather, she still felt the ache from the night Chad shoved her, but she wore it like a ribbon of resilience. Instead of bitterness, she found purpose. Inspired by their own struggle, she began programs teaching patients how to advocate for themselves in healthcare systems, bridging the same gap Jack was teaching on the civic side. Compassion, she liked to say, didn't end at the bedside. It was a way of facing the world. Chad surprisingly became a symbol of something else: redemption. After testifying against Karen and Doug, he served probation and mandatory service at the Pine Creek Community Center. There, around veterans and families, he admitted publicly that Sarah's kindness during his hospital stay cracked something in him. For the first time, he told the judge, someone I hurt treated me with dignity, and it made me realize the difference between false power and real strength. The community, once ready to hate him, slowly accepted his change. He wasn't a hero, but he was proof that even those drunk on authority could learn humility. For Jack, the transition felt like finishing a long deployment, but this time, the return was sweeter. He watched as neighbors who had lived in quiet isolation now greeted each other at block parties. Parents once fined for leaving toys outside now coordinated pool days. An elderly woman he remembered as withdrawn after her wheelchair ramp debacle now rolled proudly through the community garden, tending tomatoes and greeting the kids who helped her plant. Pine Creek wasn't just surviving, it was breathing. At night, Jack and Sarah would sit on their porch, a trellis thick with roses climbing behind them. The very structure that sparked the first confrontation had now become the symbol of a reclaimed community. It stood strong, wrapped in blossoms, a reminder that small acts of resistance, even a handmade gift of love, could ignite something larger. Mike and Rebecca would often stop by with a bottle of wine, laughing about the revolution, as neighbors had begun calling it. Jack would chuckle quietly when Rebecca teased, "Did you ever think retirement meant running a community insurgency?" Jack's answer always came steady, the way it had on deployments. "The only easy day was yesterday," he said. But when you have the right team, the right strategy, and the will to keep going, you can beat any system, abroad or here. He'd raise his glass then, not in war cry, but in peace, savoring the fact that his most important operation had given people something bullets never could: hope. For Jack Morrison, defending liberty had once meant distant wars on foreign soil. Now, it had meant defending his own wife, his own neighbors, and his own street. The weapons had been different: documents and cameras instead of rifles, statutes instead of explosives. But the principle was the same: never bow to intimidation, and never let the vulnerable be silenced. Sarah would lean against his arm, roses blooming overhead, and whisper, "They thought they built a kingdom. They had no idea they built a community instead." And as laughter rose from passing neighbors and children played freely under the sunset, Jack knew she was right. This wasn't the retirement he envisioned, but it was so much better. It was victory not of one man, but of many. A neighborhood reborn under the truth that freedom isn't given, it's defended, even in your own backyard.